Hello, I'm Patrick Moore. Throughout the years of the Apollo space program, I had the privilege of presenting all the live coverage on British television. The story this video unfolds is truth, not fiction. The dramatic events which took place in April 1970 kept the world on tenterhooks for 9 days. I'm here in the Space Gallery of the Science Museum in London to tell the story. Here, undoubtedly, is one of the best space exhibitions outside America. And throughout this program, we'll take time to look at many of the fascinating details. But before I tell you about that near-fatal mission, I'd like to tell you how the Apollo program came into being. Our story begins on the 4th of October, 1957. On that day, Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite, was launched by the Russians. Explorer 1, the first American satellite, followed 3 months later. Thus began the race for space between the two great nations. More than 100 years earlier, W.S. Gilbert had written, "They're going to send a wire to the moon, and they'll set the Thames on fire very soon." And in 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space. And 8 years later, the immortal words of Neil Armstrong, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," rang out around the world. Inevitably, the moon had to be our first target. It's our faithful companion in space and stays together with us as we journey around the sun. Even a small telescope will show its mountainous, cratered surface with the broad, dark plains, which we still call seas, even though we know that there has never been any water in them. It's never much more than 250,000 miles away, and even the nearest of the planets, Venus, is always 100 times as remote. It was only in our own time that travel to the moon became a real possibility. Virtually all the journey has to be done in empty space, and only the rocket, which works by what Isaac Newton called the principle of reaction, will be able to do the job. It wasn't until 1926 that the first liquid-propellant rocket was launched. Only in 1957 that the Russians ushered in the space age by sending up the first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1. Yet, all in all, progress has been amazingly rapid. Less than 7 decades separated Orville Wright's first hop from Kitty Hawk to Neil Armstrong's step onto the bleak rocks of the lunar Sea of Tranquility. When President John F. Kennedy announced that the United States planned to send a man to the moon before 1970, he was very well aware of the problems ahead.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
Space is a dangerous environment. It would be wrong to pretend that rockets are wholly reliable, and there was also the moon itself to be considered. Would its surface be firm enough to support the weight of a spacecraft? There had been suggestions that the so-called seas, at least, might be covered with deep, treacherous dust layers. Much had to be done before a manned flight could be attempted, and the President's timetable was painfully short. Moreover, nobody really knew what the Russians were planning. One problem about the moon is its lack of atmosphere. It's smaller than the Earth, with a diameter of only a little over 2,000 miles, and it has only 1/81st of the Earth's mass. That's to say, if you could put the Earth in one pan of a gigantic pair of scales, you would need 81 moons to balance it. The moon's globe is also less dense than that of the Earth, and the escape velocity is lower, only 1.5 miles per second, as against our own 7 miles per second. This means that any atmosphere the moon may once have had has leaked away, and today the lunar world is airless. This also means it must be waterless and lifeless. It's a world of everlasting calm, and there can be no sound. Sound waves are carried by air. The lunar day is long. The moon spins round once in 27 Earth days, as against our own 24 hours. And the sky is jet black all the time. Yet, even before the Apollo program was conceived, much had been learned. And during the 1960s, the entire surface was mapped by automatic spacecraft, including the far side, which we can never see from Earth because it's always turned away from us. As expected, the far side regions proved to be just as barren and just as crater-scarred as the hemisphere we've always known. More importantly, Russian lunar vehicles and American surveyors made controlled landings and showed no signs of sinking into dust. One obstacle at least was removed, and the Apollo plans went ahead with all possible speed. Inevitably, there were mishaps. The worst came in January 1967, not in outer space, but a mere 200 feet off the ground. During a routine test in an Apollo module, a disastrous fire caused the death of 3 astronauts, Grissom, White, and Chaffee. Quite apart from the human tragedy, the accident caused a great deal of radical rethinking with regard to design and safety measures. It was remarkable, therefore, that the first crew-carrying Apollo was ready for launch less than 2 years later. On the 11th of October 1968, Apollo 7, carrying astronauts Schirra, Eisele, and Cunningham, was put into a closed orbit round the Earth and remained aloft for over 10 days. Then, in the following December, Apollo 8 made the first circumlunar manned flight. The crew members were Borman, Lovell, and Anders. And it was, of course, James Lovell who was later to command the ill-fated Apollo 13. The Apollo plan had to be complicated. It was simply too difficult to launch a spacecraft from Earth, land it directly on the moon, and bring it home. Of the 3 Apollo astronauts, 2 would make the actual descent in a lunar module, leaving the 3rd member orbiting the moon in the command module. At the end of the lunar part of the mission, the top part of the lunar module would blast back to rejoin the orbiting command module, leaving the bottom part of the lunar module on the moon's surface to act as a launch pad. After rendezvous, the lunar module would be jettisoned, would be either left in orbit or else deliberately crashed onto the moon. Therefore, the lunar module's role would be ended after rendezvous, and this proved to be of vital importance in the story of Apollo 13. Apollo 9 of March 1969 was another test in Earth's orbit. Then, in May, Apollo 10, carrying astronauts Stafford, Cernan, and Young, made another circumlunar flight and did everything apart from the actual landing. And here, at the Science Museum, we can see the actual Apollo 10 command module. From this craft, the astronauts orbited the moon and surveyed the site which had been selected for the first manned landing, the waterless Sea of Tranquility, one of the moon's great lava plains. All went well, and the stage was set for Apollo 11. Apollo 11 was commanded by a civilian, Neil Armstrong, who had already been in space with the earlier Gemini program. So too had Edwin, Buzz Aldrin, who was scheduled to be the second man on the moon. Note now that his name really is Buzz. He changed it from Edwin by deed poll. The third crew member was Michael Collins. Though he didn't actually make the landing, he commented that at least he'd gone 90% of the way. Tension mounted as Armstrong and Aldrin began the descent. Although every possible precaution had been taken, it was still a jump into the unknown. And if the touchdown were faulty, there could be no possibility of rescue. The final landing was controlled manually by Armstrong, and then came his voice, loud and clear. The Eagle has landed. Touchdown was 4 miles downrange of the plan point and a mere 37 seconds late. The date was July the 20th, 1969. It was natural that the astronauts should want to depart from their original schedule, which allowed for a period of sleep before starting the outside walk. With mission control approval, everything was put forward. At 4 minutes to 4 in the morning of July the 21st, British summer time, Armstrong stepped off the ladder to be followed 20 minutes later by Aldrin. For the next 2 hours, 47 minutes, the surface activity went on. There were symbolic tasks, such as the setting up of the American flag, and also the deployment of scientific instruments. Above all, lunar samples had to be collected and stored. A television camera set up some 60 feet from the Eagle showed the entire scene, and the astronauts were seen clearly. Working under 1/6 normal gravity didn't prove difficult, and there were no mishaps. The next really tense moment came when Armstrong and Aldrin blasted back into orbit. The Eagle had only one ascent engine, and this had to work faultlessly first time. Mercifully, it did. The astronauts rejoined Collins in the command module, and the return journey was comparatively uneventful. Nobody could better Aldrin's description of the lunar scene as magnificent desolation. And here we can see a reconstruction of the Apollo 11 lunar module. This was originally planned for use in the James Bond film Diamonds Are Forever, but it was decided that an alternative method should be used to reproduce the visual effect. However, the model makers were persuaded to build it as planned, and it became part of the exhibition here at the Science Museum. Apollo 12 followed in November 1969. Astronauts Conrad and Bean came down within range of an old automatic surveyor probe which had been on the moon for some years and were able to bring parts of it home for analysis. For over 7 hours, they explored the region of the Oceanus Procellarum, Ocean of Storms, and once again, all went well. Like their predecessors, they were quarantined on return just in case they brought back any harmful substance. But thereafter, quarantining was abandoned since it had become clear that the moon was totally sterile. No life had ever existed there before it had been brought from Earth. So far, everything had gone with surprising smoothness, and all the manned Apollo missions had been, to all intents and purposes, trouble-free. But then, in April 1970, came Apollo 13. 13 is always said to be the unluckiest of numbers, and from the start there were problems with the 13th Apollo. The selected crew members were James Lovell, Fred Hayes, and Thomas Mattingly. At the last moment, it was found that all three had been exposed to German measles. Lovell and Hayes were tested and found to be immune to the disease. Mattingly was not, and so he was replaced by Jack Swigert. It was not an auspicious beginning. Apollo 13 was scheduled to continue the work of the 2 earlier landings and to extend it. With each mission, the scientific content was increased. The target was the area of the ruined crater Fra Mauro in the waterless Mare Nubium, or Sea of Clouds, one of a group of 3 craters. There was nothing really special about the region, but at least it was another part of the moon. The landing was to be made in the lunar module Aquarius. The code name for the command module was Odyssey. During the launch, one of the motors cut off early, but otherwise all went according to plan, and Apollo 13 was on schedule as it went on its way moonward. It did so without the fanfare of publicity that had surrounded Apollos 11 and 12. So little had gone wrong with the NASA moon program since the earlier disastrous fire that it had come to be regarded as more or less routine, and people in general had become somewhat blasé about it.
This little tape recorder has been a big benefit to us in passing some of the time away in our transit out to the moon. And it's rather odd to see it floating like this in Odyssey while it's playing the theme from 2001. This is the crew of Apollo 13, wishing everybody there a nice evening, and we're just about ready to close out our inspection of Aquarius and get back for a pleasant evening in Odyssey. Good night.
Odyssey had to be docked with Aquarius. This obviously was very much of a precision operation.
We're hard docked, Houston.
Roger, understand, hard dock, good deal.
Okay, I can see the S4B now at the hatch window.
But then, when Apollo 13 was 178,000 miles from Earth, the whole situation changed, and changed dramatically. The drama was about to begin.
13, we've got one more item for you when you get a chance. We'd like you to stir up your cryo tanks. In addition, I have Shaft and Trunnion
Okay.
for a look at the Comet Bennett if you need it.
Okay, stand by. We've had a problem here.
Flight guidance.
Go, guidance.
We've had a hardware restart. I don't know what it was.
Okay.
Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a main B bus undervolt.
You see an AC bus undervolt there, guidance? Or ECOM?
Negative, flight.
I believe the crew reported it.
We got a main B undervolt.
We may have had an instrumentation problem, flight.
Roger.
And we had a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning there.
The sensation I had, that I had felt a vibration accompanying the bang, not a large vibration or shudder.
Is there any kind of leads we can give them? Or are we looking at instrumentation, or we got a real problem, or what?
We're reading 0 N2 pressure in fuel cell 1 and 13 PSI on fuel cell 3 O2 pressure.
Okay, Barrett, what do you want to do? Open circuit fuel cell 1 and 3?
That's firm flight.
Shut down the reactance valve, and I asked for a reconfirmation, since when you do that, it's sort of irreversible. If you shut one of these things down, they only can be restarted from ground support equipment.
Yeah, that's because of AC. And it looks to me, looking out the hatch, that we are venting something. We are venting something out into space.
Okay, let's everybody think of the kind of things we'd be venting. GNC, you got anything that looks abnormal in your system?
Negative, flight.
How about you, ECOM? You see anything that, with the instrumentation you got, that could be venting?
That's a firm flight. Let me look at the system flight as far as the venting is concerned.
Okay, let's start scanning.
Here is a bulletin from ABC News. The Apollo 13 spacecraft has had a serious power supply malfunction that could cause the lunar landing mission to be terminated early.
I assume you've called in your backup ECOMs?
Flight, say again?
Have you called in your backup ECOMs now? See if we can get some more brain power in this
We
thing?
got one here.
Roger.
At the moment, the astronauts are continuing to try to isolate their trouble. A late report says the spacecraft now is operating on battery power alone. All unnecessary equipment is being turned off.
Okay, now let's everybody keep cool. We got the LEM still attached. The LEM spacecraft's good, so if we need to get back home, we got a LEM to do a good portion of it with. Okay, let's make sure that we don't do anything that's going to blow our CSM electrical power with the batteries, or that will cause us to lose the main or the fuel cell number 2. Okay, we want to keep the O2 and that kind of stuff working. We'd like to have RCS, but we got the command module system, so we're in good shape if we need to get home. Let's solve the problem, but let's not make it any worse by guessing.
My concern was increasing all the time. It went from, I wonder what this is going to do to the landing, to I wonder if we can get back home again.
Okay, I'm coming back to you.
Flight.
Go ahead.
I think the best thing we can do right now is start a power down.
right about then, it was quite apparent to me that it was just a question of time that the command module was going to be dead.
You don't want to get fuel cell pumps off, do you?
We can do that on fuel cell number 1 flight.
Okay, well, let's make sure we don't blow the whole mission. The thing that concerns me is throwing equipment. We had a problem. We don't know the cause of the problem.
Flight, I've got a feeling we've lost 2 fuel cells. I hate to put it that way, but I don't know why we've lost them. It doesn't all tag up.
Network from Flight.
Flight network.
Bring me up another computer in the RTCC, will you?
We got one machine on the RTCC, and we got dual CPs downstairs.
Okay, I want another machine up in the RTCC, and I want a bunch of guys capable of running D-logs down there.
Roger that.
What all this means is only speculation at this point. First, though there has been some tumbling or rotation of the spacecraft, the astronauts do not appear to be in any immediate danger.
Tell you what, GNC, can you get somebody in the back room to try to figure out what the equivalent delta V is we're getting, so that we can see if we can backtrack to see if we can figure out what's venting. Roger, we'll give it a try, Flight. Okay?
When I looked up and saw both oxygen pressures, one absolutely zero and the other one going down, it dawned on me, and I'm sure Jack and Fred about the same time, that we were indeed in serious trouble. The only way to survive the situation was to transfer to the LEM.
Flight Econ.
Go ahead, Econ.
The pressure in O2 tank 1 is all the way down to 297. We better think about getting in the LEM or using the LEM systems.
I'd say this is as serious a situation as we have ever had in manned spaceflight. We've always called the LEM a good lifeboat under those circumstances. If at any time in the mission, however, the LEM had separated and we had gotten ourselves into a rendezvous situation or the command module being around the moon, then what you state is absolutely true. It would be a fatal situation.
Almost 200,000 miles out in space, an oxygen tank had exploded, ripping off the side of the service module. The oxygen tank, situated here, well, you can see the damage. The Odyssey was disabled.
Tell them you from Flight.
Go ahead, Flight.
I want you to get some guys figuring out minimum power in the LEM to sustain life.
The astronauts rode in the lunar module attached to a lifeless command module. The scientific exploration mission had turned into one of survival. Apart from oxygen and the power saved for re-entry, the command module was dead. The guidance platform of Aquarius, designed to land and take off from the moon, would have to be used.
The first milestone was to get alignment on the LEM platform. Alignments are important, you know, because without knowing exactly which way the attitude of the spacecraft is in space, there's no way to tell how to burn or how to use the engines of that spacecraft to get the proper trajectory to come home.
The most important thing after survival was to align the LEM, or Lunar Excursion Module. In this situation, alignment is critical, because without knowing the direction of the craft, it's impossible to know how to use the engines to get the correct trajectory for Earth.
The position we are now on the Earth-Moon plane, we have to go around the moon to get back if we're going to use the DIPS engine. You would have had enough capability with the SPS engine, but of course we don't dare use that now. So we have to go to the back side of the moon and come back.
To get into the correct orbit around the moon, the crew had already departed from the trajectory that would automatically bring them back to Earth. They'd have to get back onto a safe course toward Earth. In order to do this, they'd have to round the moon on the far side and back.
He needs to put his throttle to min also, Flight.
Throttle to min?
Yes, he's at 29% now, roughly.
This maneuver, again, was completed on time, and because it was a manual burn, we had a three-man operation. Jack would take care of the time. He'd tell us when to light off the engine, when to stop it. Fred handled pitch maneuver, I handled the roll maneuver, and I pushed the buttons to start and stop the engines.
Aquarius, and you go for the burn. Okay, Aquarius, you're looking good.
First problem was solved, but there were many others. They were back on course for Earth, and they'd certainly have enough food, and also enough oxygen to breathe, but drinking water was a problem. The astronauts had to ration themselves to 6 fluid ounces a day, and that meant severe dehydration. It certainly didn't help the condition of Fred Hayes, who had fallen ill and was causing great concern to everybody.
What we'll be doing till we get them back on the water is concentrating on everything that is their lives are dependent upon at the moment, rather than worrying about the accident, because there's nothing we can do about that now. It appears at the present time that everything is under control and that we have a safe situation at the moment.
Hey, I want to say you guys are doing real good work.
So are you guys, Jack.
We are about 70 hours from home, and we think we have the situation in control. We've projected the consumables as I've described, and we have a plan for carrying out the rest of the mission, but there's going to be no relaxation at all as far as that goes from now until splash.
Before the craft went behind the moon, a choice had to be made: where to bring them down. On their present course, they would have splashed down in the Indian Ocean. Recovery would have been difficult. A burn to bring them home faster would take them to the Pacific Ocean, very close to the recovery forces. There was a possibility of bringing them home even faster, which would seem the most logical thing to do in the circumstances. But they would then be placed in the South Atlantic, again away from the recovery forces. It was decided to bring them down in the Pacific.
We've run these simulators both here and at the Cape and at the contractors that continuously ever since last night. We've tried to simulate virtually everything that we've had the crew to do that is non-normal that they've done, and we've proven most everything that we've been able to run on the simulator prior to passing it up to them. There may be some details we haven't done, but at least we've checked the feasibility of everything we've done, and we'll continue to do that.
They passed 137 miles from the moon. For Lovell, it was the second time he'd seen the moon so close, but there was no time for contemplation. There was another critical burn coming.
Okay, let's get the cameras squared away. Let's get off in the burn. We have one chance, Al.
And in Houston, the newsmen prepared to tell the anxious world the astronaut's story. After Apollo 13 had separated from the Saturn third stage, the discarded hardware had been sent onto a trajectory toward the moon. Its impact was recorded by the seismometer left by the previous mission, Apollo 12.
By the way, Aquarius, we see the results now from 12's seismometer. Looks like your booster just hit the moon and it's rocking it a little bit. Over.
Well, at least something worked on this flight. I'm sure glad we didn't have a limb impact, too.
Jim, you go for the burn. Go for the burn.
Roger, understand. Go for the burn.
Guidance okay?
We're good, flight.
Control okay?
We're okay, flight.
Tell me.
We're go, flight.
Inco okay?
We're good, flight.
Ground confirms ignition.
We're burning 40%.
West Houston, you're looking good.
Roger. Shut down.
Roger, shut down. I say that was a good burn.
Roger, now we want to power down as soon as possible.
Understand.
After this, all but the life-sustaining systems were shut down.
I think the LEM spacecraft's in excellent shape, and I think it's fully capable of getting the crew back. I think, as we have found before, every time we've put the LEM spacecraft to a test, it's always done much more than it was guaranteed to do, and I think this is a good case in point.
The LEM water gun was leaking, and we shut that off. I guess it leaked about a quart of water, I would estimate. But it took me about 2 days to get my feet dry, and of course, I think you were all aware that the temperatures were going down in both vehicles, and it's made for very chilly feet for a couple days.
Ok, au revoir.
Lord, your astronauts will come back safe.
If I may be serious for one moment and ask the entire audience for a moment of prayer for the crewmen of the Apollo 13. We'll hold silence for a moment, please.
RCS-A stands at 62% and B at 62%.
I feel we've gone a hell of a long time without any sleep. We're going to have to start thinking about getting people back to sleep again because I didn't get any sleep last night at all.
Command module just slowly kept going down in temperature until I think just prior to re-entry, it was down to about 38 degrees. And along with that, it was a sort of a chilling coldness. The walls were perspiring, the windows were completely wet, and it wasn't too healthy. I recall that we went in there to get some hot dogs one day, and it was like reaching into the freezer for the food.
So if you want my opinion of how they handled the situation when it happened, they handled it exactly like we'd expect them to. They were about as well on top of it as anybody could be who knew on what we knew, which isn't very much, I'll have to admit. But I think they did everything right within the knowledge that was available to us in a timely fashion, which is what all we expect of them. I think they did a beautiful job of it.
The astronauts faced a further problem, their own exhaled breath. The lithium hydroxide, the chemical used to take carbon dioxide out of the air, was not sufficient in the lunar module. They'd have to adapt the canisters from the command module to fit the hoses in the LEM. The ground control improvised an adapter to solve the situation out of the materials they knew the astronauts had available on board. Cardboard from a checklist, plastic bags, and tape. It's amazing to think that with all this sophisticated technology involved in Apollo missions, that one of the major problems could have been solved with these.
At this point in time, I think the partial pressure of carbon dioxide was reading about 15 millimeters. And we constructed two of these things and put them online, and I think within an hour, the partial pressure of CO2 was down to 2/10.
So you see that survival now became one of initiative and ingenuity, and it was one which the ground continually helped us along. We had all kinds of people on the ground trying to think up ways of extending our lifetime.
There was yet another burn. It was to make a mid-course correction to get Apollo 13 into the narrow corridor through the atmosphere for a safe return to Earth.
We're at burn attitude, flight.
College.
Ignition. Thrust looks good. Shut down. Hang in there, it won't be long.
There were moments when I didn't know how much consumables we had, whether we could make it back or not, but in a situation like that, there's only one thing you can do. You just keep going, and you just keep thinking up where you can get more consumables. And so that's exactly what we did.
On April the 17th, they prepared for re-entry. After a small course correction burn, they jettisoned the damaged service module.
SM.
Copy that.
And there's one whole side of that spacecraft missing.
Is that right?
The whole panel is blown out, almost from the base to the engine.
Really a mess. Man, that's unbelievable.
Next, they got back into Odyssey, to jettison Aquarius prior to entry into the atmosphere.
Okay, copy that. Farewell, Aquarius, and we thank you. Okay, LOS in a minute or a minute and a half. At entry attitude, we'd like Omni Charlie. And welcome home.
Thank you.
Odyssey Houston standing by, over.
Okay, go over.
Odyssey Houston, we show you on the mains. It really looks great.
Apollo 13, Apollo 13, this is recovery, over. They're going through 5,000. Under Apollo 13, this is recovery, and your chutes look good. Apollo 13, this is recovery. We observed your RCS burn, over. The recovery, Apollo 13 is deceptive. Apollo 6 is recovery, over. Photo 1, splashdown at this time.
At 12:07 Houston time on April the 17th, the command module Odyssey splashed down in the Pacific. If there had been relatively little publicity when Apollo 13 blasted away from Cape Canaveral, there was certainly no lack of it now. Strangely, for a few days, while the astronauts were in deadly danger, every nation seemed to become united, and there can have been no country in which no prayers were said for their safe return. But in what shape were they? All three were suffering from woolly-headedness and disorientation, and all had lost weight. In Lovell's case, as much as 14 pounds. In addition, Fred Hayes was suffering from infection and fever. But all recovered in a surprisingly short time, and a week later they faced the press at a major conference. Some of Lovell's words were particularly worth remembering. "I'm very much disappointed, just as Fred is and Jack is, that we couldn't complete the mission. We certainly wanted to make a lunar landing. Frau Murer has so much to offer, we thought. But this was my 4th space flight, and there are many people in our organization who have not flown and who deserve to fly and are talented enough to fly. And they deserve a mission. If the NASA team feel this team should go back to Frau Murer, I'm certainly willing to go there. But otherwise, I think other people ought to do it."
I recall, Captain, that when I
A typically unselfish comment. And as we now know, none of the Apollo 13 astronauts did go back to the moon.
I hereby declare that this was a successful mission. From the start, the exploration of space has been hazardous adventure. The voyage of Apollo 13 dramatized its risks. The men of Apollo 13, by their poise and skill under the most intense kind of pressure, epitomized the character that accepts danger and surmounts it. Theirs is the spirit that built America. Your mission served your country. It served to remind us all of our proud heritage of a nation, to remind us that in this age of technicians and scientific marvels, that the individual still counts, that in a crisis, the character of a man or of men will make the difference.
Apollo 14, launched on January the 31st, 1971, was commanded by Alan Shepard, who, less than a decade earlier, had been the first American in space. 3 more Apollos followed, and the program ended in December 1972 with number 17. And all in all, what was learnt from Apollo 13? The purely scientific results were naturally meager. Some images of the far side of the moon, that really was all. But in other ways, the experience was invaluable. simply because it showed what could be achieved by a combination of courage, skill, and improvisation. But there's one aspect of the drama which is immensely sobering. The astronauts were saved because they were able to use the engine of the lunar module Aquarius. But had the explosion happened on the return flight instead of the outward journey, there would have been no Aquarius. It would have been jettisoned, and the astronauts would have been helpless. In the whole of man's first ventures to the moon, no mission will have a more honored place than this one. It was indeed a story of tragedy turned into triumph, and the world will never forget Lovell, Hayes, and Swigert, the heroes of Apollo 13.